So we're going to announce our commune that we're going to be building in northern Pennsylvania, where if you want to come and live and work on our no, I'm just kidding.
Right.
Only kind of kidding. So yeah.
Wow, that
Um,
would be the wouldn't that be the life, though, right?
Welcome to the Creative Navigators.
We are two unlikely friends exploring resistance by examining the intersection of the creative process, productivity culture, and artistic expression.
So, anyways, how are you?
It's not too bad. I'm okay. We just went out last night. We hadn't done that in a little while. It was pretty fun. We went to that performance art event, and then we went to this arcade bar after.
Mm-hmm.
That's really close by. It was all pretty close by. I live very close to downtown,
Mm.
so
Downtown, like Miami
Fort
or
Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale?
Fort
Okay,
Lauderdale, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And no, it was a good time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
pretty good time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. I'm trying to force myself to get out there and start doing more stuff like that again. I used to before COVID, I was all over that kind of thing, but now it's just like, ugh.
Yeah, it's hard to like get back into it after all that. I think
Yeah.
it's a lot in your head, I think, too, because like it's always like the anxiety of like, oh gosh, like but well, at least for me, but it once you start doing it, it's a little more
Mm-hmm.
easier to get into, because I mean, I feel like I've been going out a lot, and that feels unusual because I haven't been doing that in years.
I was coming into work today, music or not work. So my where my computer at home is, the little office area is like right by my brother's bedroom. And so it's like not the best situation for recording at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. So I came into work instead because I have this nice little office space that's pretty good. And I'm on my way into the office this morning to record, and I start just like reminiscing about how life has changed because
Oh,
I haven't really lived in my hometown seriously since 2013 when I went to Bethel the first time. So like 11 years or 10 years when I came back to start working this job. Um, and this kind of is a nice lead into our topic for the day. I the last time I was here in Wenatchee in a serious capacity was, there was preaching on Saturday mornings, or I was working,
hmm.
or then I go to Bethel, and then the Saturdays were always about Bethel activities, and then I went to college, and Saturdays were studying and doing homework or just more work, and it's just weirdly weird to be like, you know what, I actually have a situation in life where my Saturdays are mine. I can get up on a Saturday morning, come in, work on a podcast,
Hmm.
um, and then start building my new community. And then it's just weird. It's something that's new. I haven't had it for a long time, but I'm really enjoying the more like laid back, relaxed aspect of life now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting, because that's probably one of the first things that I also like um appreciated when I when I stopped going to meetings.
Attending, yeah.
I was like, oh, I have my weekends to myself
Weekends,
now.
yeah.
I could do whatever. And that's interesting too, in a way of, yeah, I guess it does really get into the topic of fond family, chosen family. Yeah, right around that time too is when I drifted away from, Jehovah's Witness stuff, and then
Mm-hmm.
I started finding like queer people, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started getting into that world and making new friends and finding new people and doing new things, and just really getting away from all that into like
Mm-hmm.
a new social sphere. And especially in that situation, which I think it echoes a lot of like the type of situation that a lot of queer people go through, where they're their blood family or their, in this case, their main social circle
Mm-hmm.
kind of rejects them or pushes them out in some way. And then now they have to go find a new, I mean, yeah, I guess family essentially, like people that are supportive,
Yeah.
people that are going to understand. And I feel like that's pretty much what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And you had it
but
from both. You had the leaving Jehovah's Witnesses and then now having to figure out how to get involved with the queer community too.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, so that kind of leads well into our topic, I think, today about how for many people, even if you have, I was talking about this with my girlfriend last night, even if you do have your biological family, you have kind of this component of these are the people I was born and raised with, and hopefully you maintain good relationship with them into your adult life. But most people have to go through some sort of period of time where they start to cultivate their own social circle outside of their biological family. And what is
Hmm.
that process like? What does that entail? What does that look like? And I think that's what we're wanting to kind of dissect and discuss a little bit today.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I guess we could even start with like just kind of even explaining the concept, like
Mm-hmm.
what is a found family? What is a chosen family? Like,
Sure.
how do we explain that?
Yeah, sure. Do you have like a good elevator pitch for what even is found family, or I can take a stab at it?
I think what I think about when I think about what is found family is, uh, it's people that you. That's why I was like the other way of calling it chosen family,
Mm-hmm.
because it's people that you basically choose to be in community with, and that it's a choice. It's not an accident of birth that, well, now you have to kind of make your way and try to support each other despite like differences in thinking and values, which, that type of family is also, I think there's a lot of value in that as well, obviously. But as we know, especially if you're a queer person, that doesn't automatically mean that those people are going to support you, or we
Yeah.
see it a lot that people will abandon you. So found families, people who maybe also were rejected, maybe are in situations where they're also like looking for mutual connections,
Mm.
and then you find yourselves together, either thrown together or you come together and you support each other, but you're not necessarily related um, through blood or marriage. Um, so I would say it's just very like close friendship that functions as, like, I guess what we would consider a family.
Mm.
So supporting one another, not just socially, but like emotionally, maybe even financially, in all different types of ways that a family would. But it's just disparate individuals
You're right.
coming together. Do you think that's kind of like what?
I think that's pretty good. The only thing I think I would add to that is like the
Mm,
intentionality. I think you did touch
yeah.
on it, but like the
Oh yeah.
intentionality of it, because I found this in the smatterings of community in which I have briefly engaged since leaving my main community that I grew up in, is you kind of like get thrown into the situation where you're just like, it's expected. Oh, because we share this identity marker,
Yeah.
we're going to be community with each other. And at first you're kind of like you're grappling for any sort of connection, so you'll go along with that. But what I've really started to come to appreciate just in the last year or two has been that like really you might be an acquaintance or maybe we do have a shared identity marker, but for somebody with whom I want to be in community, there's very specific values and principles and life goals that I need to share with these people. Otherwise, it's not someone with whom I want to cultivate a close relationship.
Right. No. Yeah, and I think that goes very much well with, that whole idea of it's people that are
Yeah,
choosing to come together, and
right.
and you share those goals, you share those values.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really I've just been noticing on social media the last couple of months is really starting to, and it's probably the way my algorithm is curated, but there's a lot of conversation right now about um, parents who have children who've gone no contact with them and why that might be. And the parents, there's a lot of parents who are like making their own TikToks and posts and stuff about, oh, I'm so horrible. My children don't, they've abandoned me. And like, there's enough people at this point who get the whole concept of like, blood is not thicker than water
Hmm.
sort of thing. And they are willing to question if a child has decided to go no contact with their parents, there's probably actually a really good reason for it. Which it's like it's not they're not the same thing. It's not one for one. You have an abusive family, so you decide to leave and go find your new family. It's just so it's so very common that those things do go hand in hand with each other. Because I think a lot of people with more privileged backgrounds, they just don't get that like to have family and cousins and aunts and uncles and your grandparents and some other like lifelong family friends. That's a privilege to have that throughout, from all the way when you're
Yeah.
young and growing up all the way into your adult life. Um, like I think about, I I had some somewhat distant family that tried to reconnect with when I was first leaving the witnesses, and there was just this like there was like the matriarch being the person who married my great uncle, and then her three or four kids, and then they all have three or four kids, and then some of those kids are even starting to have. So you have like four generations of family that they just know each other well. They love each other. They spend all their free time together. They're like intimately involved with each other's lives, and that's great if you have that. But it's just for so many of us in different circumstances, we've had to either leave that system altogether or even just a minor extent, and then because we need that community, you're forced into finding that same family system somewhere else.
Right. Right. No, I no, and I agree with all that. That's basically my idea of it. That's my concept of it.
What's tough for me, like I was mentioning though, is this: it's not necessarily that you have abandoned your biological family. It's just that it so often is goes hand.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, even in my case, like my biological family did not abandon me or like reject me or anything like that.
Mm.
Um, it was more my whole entire social circle did
Hmm.
kind of do that, or that became the issue.
Yeah.
But also it's like, your family maybe doesn't is not as supportive or not as understanding, and you still
Right.
need. So in that case, it can become like a secondary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be like you're totally alienated.
Even sometimes maybe you do have that really good relationship still with
Yeah,
your main family, but even so, there are aspects of your identity that you need to
yeah,
find.
elsewhere.
Yeah, and I'm becoming a big fan of like breaking down colonialist ideals of what relationships should be. And so I'm starting to learn like, maybe this aspect of your identity you need to have this group of community and connection, and maybe this other aspect of your identity you have this community and connection. So it's all of that falls under the same umbrella. So regardless of your life circumstances, I think we can all appreciate the friends you choose versus the family that you're born into.
Right, exactly. No, I agree. Yeah. I think a lot of people intuitively kind of understand at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of like a trope. I think it's a pretty good trope, but
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of. I think it's a concept that has really been introduced
Mm-hmm.
in recent years to like the cultural consciousness, and I mean, especially me. I work in the queer community. I hear about it a lot. Um, it's I feel like it's such a anchor, it's such a tether, this concept, and sometimes maybe it sounds a little corny, but I mean it's really true because there are so many people who are, you know, like we just went over all these different types of circumstances, but I feel like especially with it's an especially important idea for queer people because
Yeah.
of the circumstances of our society. Like
Yeah.
even in my case, my family doesn't, but it's like my family doesn't reject me, but you still need a certain kind of community. You still need that that type of understanding that you may not get in your
Sure.
family.
Yeah.
And people, that can be a spectrum. That can be like total like alienation, rejection, to completely accepting. But even
Mm.
in that, you still need, like, you still need
Yeah.
your gay friends. You still need your community, that is gay friendly, or gay focused, and it's very, very different, I think.
Yeah, that makes total sense. The society is kind of like starting to shift slowly towards, you know, maybe even a little bit more acceptance for sure, but just the understanding that that's what people have had to do for so long now to survive, is to find some new family. So, since you brought up tropes, I think that's a good launching into some particular pieces of media, maybe that we can find great examples of what a found family, a chosen family looks like.
Yeah, and I definitely think that that is like a primary way that a lot of people have been introduced to the
Mm-hmm.
idea. I think there is like a tradition in queer communities around this, and then it's been given
Mm-hmm.
kind of I don't know, like form with sort of like a trope in media
Mm-hmm.
that kind of really cements it. The obvious thing is that there's a lot of queer cinema that touches on the subject, and that's pretty like straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I feel like one thing that I do see a lot with this trope is like in any kind of fantasy media, especially now, like D&D is like so popular
Mm.
right now,
Yeah.
or
Right.
even tabletop in general, but it's
Tabletop.
mostly
Yeah.
D&D. It's really mostly D&D. Um, this idea of like individuals coming together, they're not related necessarily. They might not even like have similar backgrounds, but they're coming together, common purpose. Either sometimes they're just thrown together, sometimes they have some kind of common purpose that they're trying to, even if they have their own separate agendas, like the
Mm-hmm.
story that we're going to follow is them like coming together, supporting one another. Um, oh gosh, one just comes to mind that is actually like, I think pretty popular right now is Delicious in Dungeon,
Mm.
or otherwise known as Dungeon Meshi. It's a manga that has been coming out, and a Netflix anime just came out recently about it, and it's pretty much about that. It's like it's actually, I think, a lot about that, because um I haven't finished reading it. I'm pretty far along, and the anime just started, so it's not super far along. But I feel like a major theme of it is this idea of, so the concept of the anime is that it's really about RPG like tropes in general.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that there's like this big dungeon that has opened up, and a whole kind of economy um, of explorers, dungeon crawlers has popped up, where people will get into parties and get supplies, and get ready, and then like descend the dungeon trying to find this I guess the king or whatever. There's like a big treasure, but but there's been a whole economy that has sprung up around it, because people will loot it, they'll take back stuff, and the the main story is about one party in particular that uh they got pretty deep in the dungeon. They fought a dragon, and it killed one of their party members, but before she was eaten, she teleported them out of the dungeon.
Mm.
But they left all their like supplies and everything, and she got eaten. And it turns out it's the sister of one of the main characters, and he's determined to like go back. Like, oh, if we can go back, we can revive her, because that's a big part of the story too. Is that there's an economy around people. Um, Apparently you're able to resurrect someone if they're in the dungeon. Like
Mm.
it's this whole thing. So he figures, well, how long does it take the dragon to digest her? And then, okay, we have this amount of time. If we can get back there, we can get her remains and revive her, and she won't be dead. And so, but the problem is that they they don't have any more supplies, so they would have to go back. They don't have any money, so at that point, two of their party leave, and the remaining ones are like, well, I guess we'll go back, and basically the idea is that they're gonna eat monsters to survive as they go back down to the dungeon to find her. And of course, um, they've been a party together for a while, but they're not exactly like, you know, friends. It's a business arrangement more like. So the main story is them exploring, actually like relying, because they're in this situation, they have to rely on one another and learn about one another, and they start to really kind of understand each other and really come together because they have to really survive in this different way, and become vulnerable, and some of the party members that left, they kind of reconnect with them, and it's very much about, to me, that's very much about like that found family thing, because they're not just a party. The overall idea of this manga that it's kind of looking at and maybe critiquing is, a lot of people are very like, they're working together out of business, and there's a lot of like people who, it shows a lot of different people who do things, kind of stab each other in the back, or use each other for like personal gain, and things like that. And meanwhile, this party is like, they're actually coming together for a different purpose. They're not just doing it for treasure or for gain. They're trying to like save someone they care about. And I feel like there's themes of that the story's playing with, and so I feel like that is pretty much all about that. I mean, there's a lot of manga and anime that touches on that, but that's like one that I'm really into right now. And there's like, there's maybe like elements of queerness as well, so it's really interesting. I think it's touching on a lot of themes of like community, especially. They encounter different communities in the dungeon itself, so it's really interesting, and how they help each other and overcome misunderstandings and biases and things like that. I think it's really interesting. It's a really good manga. Hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to check into that. As you're telling me the story, it's like, that's just the Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out, but
Yeah, I mean, that's what, it's a fantasy kind of trope that is very rich, and I think people really respond to it.
yeah, I it's funny, like not only the Dungeons and Dragon movie, but like the Lord of the Rings movies
Oh
and books.
yeah.
That was kind of another component to their whole story, was these ragtag group of folks who have almost nothing else in common other than they're called to, throw the ring into Mordor, and then so I guess that's a really common fantasy trope that it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fundamental. I mean, I don't know if Lord of the Rings like made it up, or I don't think it did,
They
but
just they
I think it
just took it and ran with
popularized it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think uniquely the Lord of the Rings, with its like high fantasy setting, and the lofty ideas that it's playing with, I feel like at the heart of it, it really is about like these people coming together. I mean, when you get especially to like Sam and Frodo, and it's really all about like their relationship. That's the source of the tension and the drama there. It's not even so much about getting this ring to the fires of Mount Doom. I mean, it is obviously, but like what we care about is, what's happening between them two. That's
Hmm.
the entire source of all the tension in that part of the story. It's not just about like this. I mean, that the whole. I mean, I feel like the fact that the main antagonist of the whole entire story is like never seen or heard or whatever. Like he's just an idea, and we're following these people and their relation. I feel like that's the strength of the story overall,
Mm-hmm.
and why it endures.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. So this is just like something that popped in my head as you're telling me the story too. Is that why like there's like this kind of trope or aesthetic that like fantasy is really popular for queer people? Is that is there kind of like a correlation there that fantasy likes to really dive into this like ragtag group of misfits and
Yeah,
who don't really
yeah.
go along anywhere else? So
I really think so. I think that
yeah,
is very appealing in the same way that, like, Disney villains kind of appeal to queer people. I
yeah,
think it's that same type of idea that I think queer people see themselves a lot in that type of um, arrangement, that type of community.
mm-hmm.
So when you see, yeah, like exactly that, like a ragtag group, everyone's different, everyone's like diverse,
Mm-hmm.
in different ways. I think that's just really appealing to queer people and also reflects kind of the same type of friendships. There's also an element of um, because I feel like it's very different than like sword and sorcery that maybe is more like a power fantasy type of thing that maybe appeals to straight cis men. I mean, and
Mm.
this, I'm overgeneralizing,
Sure,
obviously.
yeah.
But I do think there's something about like that kind of like um fantasy RPG like party with like diverse characters that fulfill different roles um and have different backgrounds, and usually it's the ragtag like misfits. I think that especially is what really it draws like queer people. I think they see themselves reflected in that for sure. Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, no, that's it's interesting the correlation between like an entire genre, not even just a trope, but a genre that really kind of hammers in on this chosen family concept. And as you were talking about that, I'm also starting to think um, maybe the genre that also lends itself really well to like personality characteristics or these certain like ways of talking that you can adapt and kind of take into your own vernacular. Um, I had a professor in college who he would just kind of like drop Lord of the Rings was one of his things that he would reference all the time, but just
Uh,
other media and other pieces of things. And he one time he just kind of stood up there and he's like, the reason why I do that is because if any of you get my references, I automatically know that we have this connection and it could potentially form into even more of a friendship. So like if you say, and there's entire communities dedicated to like, Sopranos, and then if you can get this one little niche line from the show, then that means you're a true fan.
oh yeah, so it's kind of like isn't there a like sociology term for like that type of in group out group kind of signaling whatever thing
Yeah,
where
like I always think of like
I don't know.
shibboleth, which the shibboleths come from the Bible because there was a story where they were, you know, trying to like keep out a certain group of people, and if they were from a different ethnic group and they would say Sibboleth because they couldn't say that sh sound, then that meant that they weren't, they were the enemy. Um, and so you'll hear that sometimes of like shibboleths or things that like automatically identify a person as being in the in group. And so anyways, back to my point was like I wonder if fantasy is a genre that lends itself really well to those kind of shibboleths.
That also, I mean, that all ties together because I think part of, especially historically, fantasy has always been, well, until very recently, not a quote unquote
Mainstream.
mainstream
Mm-hmm.
kind of, it's always been in the realm of the geeks. D&D is like popular
Right.
now. Um, I would even argue it's not that mainstream yet, but it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not as niche as it used to be.
Right.
Um, but yeah, like we've got major motion pictures with big stars, in it. Like
Right.
it's at that point. But yeah, like I would say that for historically fantasy role play, that's always been very niche, very in the realm of like like, oh, you're a geek, you're a
Yeah, right.
nerd, you play this. And I feel like there's something about coming together with other people also like that to engage in this that creates a very strong sense of identity, a strong sense of community with those people that creates a really tight bond. And I think that bond and also that sense of identity that you gain through that
Hmm.
really means that people are kind of protective of it, because I
Hmm.
think this is the other part of it, is that because it's also born out of being a misfit yourself, being not understood by society, being kind of maybe even slightly rejected, ostracized, in school or just in work, whatever. Um, and that brings people together who also are
Mm-hmm.
similar, because it's like you know, you understand the hardships that you've all sort of gone through, and you're able to
Right.
escape into this like this world where you're not like that, but then it also helps form those bonds. And I think that creates uh the idea of people being protective, not just of like the identity that they've constructed, but
Hmm.
also of each other, because
Yeah.
you don't know who this person is, you don't know if they're
Right.
like gonna understand, and you kind of need, I mean, I don't think people obviously do this super consciously, but like, you once you when you're in that situation, like if you go to a convention and it's just every geek everywhere all together, and you go, you wear you're gonna cosplay a
Hmm.
character, or you're gonna wear something of a fandom that you want to represent, or have things. It's like it's neat when you feel like you're the only person in the world that likes this thing, and then you meet a
Yeah,
bunch of
right.
other people that also like it, and you're like, oh, we can talk about this. And I've never met you, but
Right.
we're on the same page. It's like instant like recognition and instant family almost. It's like
Yeah.
when and I find that it's like when you find other people and you discover that they have, it's not just something in common. It's something a little deeper than that, I think. I think it's
Yeah.
when you discover, oh, they have a a certain kind of experience that often is informed by like oppression. It's there's something about it that is maybe negative in a way, like
Mm.
that you immediately know, like, oh, they're safe, and they get it, and
Right.
they're gonna understand. There's kind of like almost like an instant bond or an instant like recognition that draws you together.
Right.
I think that's kind of like the source of it. That's the source of the whole Find Family thing. I think that's the experience that people go through, especially in fantasy spaces, in like video game, all these like geek things. I still think, even though it's more popular than it's ever been, and it's more people are engaging in it than ever, I still think that
It's still
there's,
niche enough, yeah.
yeah, I still think it's like there's, and how deep do you go into it, like there's casual people who, people who engage casually with, maybe like Star Wars, whatever. But like, if you've been a fan for the last like 40 years, and you're all into the extended universe and blah blah, you've seen every show. It's like that's a different type of
Right. Than
thing,
somebody who just
yeah.
got into The
Or
Mandalorian
they've
because
seen the
of, yeah.
movies, and
Right.
that's very easily accessible, and that's
Right.
fine. But yeah, it's a different type of level, or however you want to call it.
Yeah. It's funny you bring this up because we've talked about this even on other iterations of this podcast where the like intense devotion that people have to a fandom and then they start to go on about, what's canon, what's not canon, or they have fan fiction that almost becomes canon to them, or they really deep dive into these things, and if you dare to insult that thing or call it boring, that's the worst thing you can do is say it's boring or uninteresting. and it almost like you're attacking them personally. And now what you're bringing up is starting to make me think like that's the reason for such that
Yeah.
intense fandom
Yeah.
is because of so much of their identity formation has come about as a result of their attachment to this piece of media or whatever it might be, that to threaten that thing feels to them like a personal attack.
Yeah. Yeah. It's people feel very protective about it
Yeah.
because of that.
And which I'm not like you shouldn't do that. I do think there's an interesting to further that discussion is like what is it about the particular thing that you so deeply resonate with, not just specifically the thing, but identifying what the key core. And then this goes back to the chosen family concept of like I have learned over and over again that identity markers don't make good community. It's shared values, it's morals and life goals, and those are the things that make it important. So when you're like the first step of getting to know somebody might be, oh, we both love Lord of the Rings, we both love Avatar: The Last Airbender, but there are the morals and values behind it that are being talked about that I resonate with, and those are the things that I'm going to look for in the community and my chosen family that I'm looking to build moving forward. And I think for a lot of people who don't actually, maybe it's because they lack media literacy or some other reason they've never just like really deep dived into their favorite pieces of media, that they struggle with that. And what that also makes me think of is people who don't understand, like they think the Star Wars, they don't see the very clear parallels to um, rebellion against empires or the subtle rise of fascism or other pieces of, what's another one that came out recently, like, or just like people who play, you ever see that video where there's this guy who's like, mama might have done a lot of things but at least she didn't raise a liberal, and he's playing Fortunate Son in the background. And you're just gotta laugh because he completely missed the point of that song to use that as like his anthem of being a conservative, rah rah America type of a person.
That happens a lot with Starship Troopers. That's like one of the
Mm,
prime examples because that's such a the Starship Troopers like aesthetic, the setup and everything is such a video game thing, and especially like with shooters and things like that. Like that is a huge trope, and people definitely like kind of missed the point of what that was. That it was
right.
actually like a satire critique on like fascism, but it gets complicated when you put it in video game form because
Right.
then it's
Yeah.
like, well, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's still like, you know, we're doing it and we're being cool and like whatever.
Right. Like I remember when Gears of War came out. Did you ever hear about play Gears of War? Um,
I never played it, but I yeah, I'm like
yeah.
somewhat familiar.
That was a shooter that came out for the Xbox 360. It was kind of like their flagship game in addition to Halo. And that was the big reveal at the end of that game is you were the invading force on the planet against the insect-like creatures. And then I don't think I've never played it myself, but I remember seeing a bunch of videos and reviews where it's like, and you'll never believe the twist ending is you were the bad guy the entire time. And a lot of
Not
guys who kind of,
subtle.
yeah,
Not
not
subtle.
not even subtle, but still, even without that lack of subtlety, I think a lot of guys, because that genre of game tends to draw a certain type of demographic, it was still the point was still kind of missed.
Right.
Because then they'll still in their real lives they'll be indigenous people should have fought harder to not be colonized is the kind of politics that they'll take.
That part is troublesome. And it's like, you know, it's there's so many positive things to like fandom um that I think can correlate to the found family, that there's so many positive things about it. But yeah, it can also become kind of very negative, very gatekeepy, very like that in group out group. That's when it starts to become complicated that way. Um and especially because of the how protective people are of
Mm-hmm.
but then it starts to become a gatekeeping thing where it's they're
Right.
protective of the purity of the identity,
Yeah.
and
Not.
they start to police it instead of
Yeah.
like letting it, because it should transform. Times change. What it means to be part of the group changes. What it
Mm-hmm.
means, what a lot of the stuff that has informed why the group formed in the first place might
Right.
totally change, and
Right.
so it means something different,
Right.
and new people coming in are going to have different experiences, and it's like you have to be able to adapt to if you care about making a space that's inclusive and safe for
Right.
people, which I think that's at the core of what a fan family is supposed to be.
Right.
Then you would there's I think like constructive ways to to do that doesn't become like that, because
Right.
then that's just protecting, like it's not going to serve its purpose. It's like we've created the exclusive club and now it's closed. It's like,
Right. Which I have come to appreciate gatekeeping a little bit, just for the deeper appreciation I have now of like how bad faith actors can try to enter a community through that sort of means.
sure.
So the gatekeeping that is like there's protective gatekeeping where it's you can tell these people are trying to pretend, and I hate saying that almost because that even that concept gets abused and misused.
Sure.
But somebody's trying to get a backdoor way into my community, versus just like, oh, I got to protect the purity of this thing. Like right now, there's right as we speak, the new Avatar live action series is coming out, and I'm seeing a bunch of that from people who are like, this is not true to the original source material. And I don't, I'll admit I'm not really a big fan of this new series that's coming out. The couple episodes I've watched, but if it gets people into the medium, then isn't that a good thing? Isn't that nothing but a good thing? I could think of just countless examples of fandoms that, and Star Wars is probably
Yeah.
the best
Oh
one,
yeah.
where the old guard, so to speak, is just so intensely interested in maintaining their sovereignty over this property that, like you're saying, it gets to the point where the whole point of carving out this niche interest in this topic is meant to be to give people a safe space to do so, and it becomes a not safe space for new people entering the community through other means. And maybe that's not even the worst thing in the world, because then they go off and form new communities, hopefully with better better coping mechanisms than the old guard. But
Hmm.
it's a very complex topic. It's something that I do think about a lot. Um, I was actually kind of thinking about somewhat related to this recently, because here in America we just had the Super Bowl 2 weeks ago, and American sports are kind of like, sports are really popular all over the world, but in America we really do seem to idolize our sports heroes the most, and there becomes a very strong there becomes this very strong us versus them narrative with sports teams. And but for some reason it's like mainstream acceptance with sports versus, if you, like you're saying, it's still kind of considered niche. It's very like nerd geek if you're into fantasy or some of the other properties that are commonly associated with that demographic. um, and I was thinking about what is it about American sports that has it be so commonly accepted compared to Lord of the Rings, or even Star Wars is not. It's still kind of like considered a little bit more niche than some other things. Um, if there's one property that I think has truly transcended communities and just mainstream acceptance, is probably like comic book movies. What they've done for the comic book industry, where everybody and their mother now watches the MCU tie-in movies. But then even then, there's some division, because like purists who think that the movies don't do any favors to the original comic storyline. So yeah, very very broad topic. A lot of things you could really kind of deep dive into. But going back to our main topic today about chosen family, is it just becomes, what I find most interesting about this topic is how media can just become yet another um, dividing factor, that a person might have initially found comfort and safety in something, but then the community pushes them away, and then it actually it becomes a way that it works against itself, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah. No, it does. It can become, I mean, like anything, it can become like really troublesome. I think, but yeah, I think like when you were speaking about the gatekeeping, I think, yeah, those are different. there's never anything that's like completely like good, completely bad. They're just tactics and things that people are responding to. And I think that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's definitely times and stuff like that is appropriate, and times when it's like, what's really going on here? Like,
Right. Yeah.
are we just excluding people just because someone's threatened, or is it like, we're under attack and people are trying to infiltrate to kind of mess up the
Mm-hmm.
group?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I do think a lot of times it's the former rather than the latter. A lot of times it's people trying to protect their idea of what they think it's supposed to be. Um, but I definitely think there are more constructive
Mm-hmm.
ways of, making sure that the group is serving its purpose, and that above all, that people feel safe, that people feel like, because I feel like if you make that a priority, then um, that's going to inform a lot of your other decisions, like how you respond to things, how you handle things. And yeah, I think as any kind of, especially if we're talking about fandom, the more it grows, the more different types of individuals and groups of individuals that get introduced. And then,
Mm-hmm.
that's just going to that will inevitably lead to more conflict, because
Mm-hmm.
there's just going to be so many different ideas and different ways that people think and feel.
Right.
And, you know, I I don't have an answer for that, but
Well, yeah, I
yeah.
was thinking as you're saying that, I'm like, it's kind of like that whole pornography thing where it's like, I don't know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it. It's like, what does like toxic fandom look like? I don't know how to describe it, but I can tell you when I see what it looks like. The Star Wars YouTubers that are every time a new Star Wars thing comes out, they just 90-minute video dismantling why it's bad. Like that's not good. That doesn't help anyone.
No, no, it really doesn't.
The other thing, this is somewhat related, but probably not entirely related. What I've really We're at a point with our media when we're talking about like media as a form of community connection is I would say that like 90% of what's wrong with most modern media is the capitalistic, extractive desire to have a thing make money. And that's like its first 1 through 5 reasons why this thing exists in the first place. And going back to again, Star Wars, a good example of what's wrong with a lot of modern Star Wars is not that it's woke, it's not that it's all these other pejoratives that people will throw at it. It's because Disney bought this thing with the sole intention of marketing it to death and making extracting every last ounce of money market value that it can out of it. They don't care about making the last person who really cared about making good Star Wars was George Lucas, and he sold it to Disney because we didn't like his ideas. Even though he himself, there's a strong argument to be made that he himself was mainly focused on the marketability of his products too. So, um,
Sure.
when we talk about like media and its potential to create and form community, now it goes back to our other overarching thing about this project that we're working on, where like the smaller niche communities and finding creativity in yourself and within smaller groups and communities is becoming, I think it's becoming ever more popular to connect with people over just like I'm going to write my own Lord of the Rings and find other people who are writing their own Lord of the Rings, and that's the community I'm going to form rather than being so intently caught up in what somebody else has already made.
Yeah. And that really reminds me of kind of an interaction I had on Instagram with an artist who made a comic about basically criticizing people who are upset that their favorite cartoon got canceled. And then he asks that this hypothetical person, "Oh, but did you support the show? Did you buy the merch? Did you do this and that?"
Right,
And
yeah.
then it shows the person like, "Oh no, I just I I illegally downloaded the show and watched it that way. I never bought anything, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And then he was basically making the argument like, "Well, y'all are so upset about the show's getting canceled, but you didn't support it. You didn't buy the
Oh,
merch.
I think I saw
You
that.
didn't do
Yeah.
yeah. You didn't
Right.
do all that, and you pirated the show and blah blah blah. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like dude, that's not.
Yeah.
We're not gonna. And then I left a comment saying something. We're not gonna consume our way out of
Right.
this mess, because I feel like that is how I guess capitalism co-opts fandom and turns
Right.
it into
If
a
if you're not spending money on something, then you're not a true fan.
you're not a true fan. That the way that you show you're a true fan is you buy the plastic.
Which yeah,
You
which
buy
what I
you,
you
you
buy
you
the
consume.
figurines, you buy the
You
yeah, which
yeah.
I really that's something I do think about somewhat often. Another very similar thing that I saw was the AI art covers, like people having their book covers are being rather than hiring an artist to do their book covers, they're like, I'm just going to use AI art generation. And there's a somewhat popular author recently who did all of her books she redid with AI art covers. And the thing was like, you guys get upset when people pirate books, but you're not understanding that like authors switching to AI art generation for their covers is like it's also for another form of piracy where because a lot of the AI art generation is taking current works and turning it into something that is supposed to be new but it's really not. Um, and that like that's what you're bringing out is a good point to what I was saying where like if you start to form smaller creative communities within your local community and that's where you like start to focus your attention, I will take care of you and we'll kind of like mutually share art and creative process and work together and in my perfect utopia that's what we would spend our days doing that and we really don't need to spend as much time working as we currently do just to survive. um,
I mean, there's already a long tradition of like artist collectives that basically kind of function like that, or at least with a lot of those principles. There's a long history, long tradition of that. You know, folks coming together, they share work, they work on each other's stuff, they share ideas, they support one another, they live together, all that
yeah.
kind of stuff. That's very like um I think that's very much in line with what we're kind of what we've been talking about.
So we're going to announce our commune that we're going to be building in northern Pennsylvania, where if you want to come and live and work on our no, I'm just kidding.
Right.
Kind only kind of kidding. So yeah,
Wow, that would be the wouldn't that be the life? Sorry.
according to my social media feeds, there are people doing that. So it's not beyond the realm of imaginable to,
No.
um, you know, you just can't. You just got to imagine that there's a better life than working your crappy job that barely pays your bills or often doesn't pay your bills, and then the only means of escapism you have is some carefully curated, marketed, oversaturated media machine that feeds you, drip feeds you, often mediocre, sometimes decent quality art, and that's your only hope for the rest of your life is to subsist on.
Work and work and work so that you can buy the plastic,
Right, you
fill
can
your house with the plastic.
feel yeah. Which I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying too about how people will criticize media without realizing it's the extractive nature of capitalism was wrong.
Right.
Is so very little stuff out there is like genuinely bad, and I've mentioned this too because I kind of want to get into reviews that are more than just like the book report style of reviews. There's very few stuff that's like when you really can think about it, it's not that it's not bad, it's just average, it's just meh. It doesn't move the needle at all. What's that? So just last night, my brother and sister-in-law start watching the Scream reboot. Have
Hmm.
you seen? Are you a Scream fan, or have you seen any of the reboot stuff?
I'm like fine with it.
Mm,
I've seen the first uh
like the Courtney
reboot.
Cox.
Oh yeah,
Oh
I've
no,
seen the
the show. Yeah,
originals.
yeah.
Um but I've seen I think the first of the reboot ones. I haven't
Okay,
seen the
okay.
last.
So you've seen this movie that I was watching last night.
Mm.
I was just shaking my head because what they decided to do with their reboot was inside the universe of this movie, somebody took the quote unquote real life events of Scream, turned that into a movie franchise based on those real people inside this universe, And then somebody who saw those movies decided, I think we need a new Scream, and then they themselves became Scream and start attacking people associated with the,
Yeah.
the universe. I'm just like, that's where we've gotten to. That's what our current nothing is sacred, everything has to be is endless reboots where it's just like the thing riffing off the same thing that it was originally was, because 20, 30 years ago when art was still kind of like movies were still kind of trying to do something new and say something interesting. There's nothing, at least from those perspectives, there's nothing new and interesting to be said anymore. So,
Yeah, it's very uninspired these days. It's rehashing. Even the new stuff is just rehashing it. And it's like,
rehashing, yeah.
what is the point? Like, if you're gonna remake something or
Say
like
something,
reboot it, like
yeah,
I
right.
don't know. I don't really know. Like, but then again, people are very not super discerning about that. Like,
Right.
they'll be
Yeah,
like, all right, I guess I'll watch this again.
media criticism is at an all-time low, yeah. Because the thought I didn't finish was like so very few stuff is bad. It's meh. It's just mediocre. It's
Yeah,
just milk toast. It's
just watchable enough.
yeah. It's like yeah, sure, I can turn off my brain and watch this or read this or play this. Um, but the truly like almost sometimes I almost prefer the genuinely bad because it's at least interesting. It's at least
Yeah,
something different, you know. They
yeah.
tried and they failed, but in that failure, there's something that's more interesting than just yet another MCU movie.
And that's kind of like the key ingredient. Is it at least interesting?
Yeah.
Because yeah, bad stuff can be really interesting. Like, I mean, I don't know. That Madam Web thing seems very interesting to me. Like from what I've heard, it sounds like it's pretty bad in like an interesting way. So I'm very curious about it.
Yeah.
There's that J Lo movie that sounds pretty insane that she funded herself to
Oh
make.
yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah.
And again, it's like what is it? What I don't. Well, this is like a whole different topic. Like, what is art? What is good art? What is bad art?
Yeah.
But yeah. I guess coming back to our
Back to our
main
topic
topic.
of the
Yeah.
chosen community. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think we've talked a lot about like how it's formed, how it's explored in media. Like we've
Right.
talked about examples and even like ways that can kind of like go off the rails a bit.
Oh yeah.
The
Or
foibles, the yeah.
the ways it can be misused and misappropriated. I think my thesis that I kind of landed on was
Mm,
um, art as connection and chosen community should be in my opinion should be formed around not the consumption of art but rather the creation of it.
the creation of it. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So have you had any like personal experiences with like kind of found family or anything like that? Like,
Yeah, I have had experience with found family. I think unfortunately, like I was mentioning at the outset, is because of the way my life has kind of transpired, has the last two or three found communities that I have found myself in have been just because of life circumstances and not necessarily because that's what I wanted to create. And actually, one of the things that I lament is my happiest period of my life was about a little over a decade ago, where I had a community where we did all those things that we shared. We had, the entertainment we enjoyed partaking in, the things we like to do, but that was part of my Jehovah's Witness community. So
mm,
it was kind of found, but at the same time, it was also not really found family. It was kind of already built in. So I have unfortunately not gotten back to a point in my life where I have recreated the community dynamic that I would like. I have been kind of driftless, going from thing to thing, finding a handful of people with whom to connect, and kind of riding that wave, and still working on like that core group of friends with whom I would create and experience life and do that sort of thing. So
right.
Sad. Oh man, I didn't realize I was going to give a depressing answer.
Well,
How?
it's tough. No, it's tough. Capitalism wants to atomize us. So,
Yeah.
trying, I mean, and that's part of the project that we're doing here,
Yeah.
create, trying to resist that means doing the opposite, creating community.
Right.
Like exactly how you said, art is connection, and you create community through I guess the creation of art is how we'll resist. And
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. And I think,
That's what we're
you
doing.
know, I've experienced the found family thing. Um, like I said, when I left Jehovah's Witnesses, I did pretty much get involved in the queer community, but that was also mixed results at first. I've had several different, I guess, like found families where they would be supportive in a lot of ways, and then they would just kind of it'd kind of be like what we observed about like fandoms and things like that, where it does become protective, gatekeepy. People get kicked out, people get
Right.
rejected, people get, and so it's kind of like, it's ups and downs. Um, and I guess I did want to mention that, at some point I did find an equilibrium
Hmm.
in the queer community where I connected with a lot of different people. I got involved with volunteering, I got involved in nonprofit, and there's a lot of different types of people that you get exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you do get opportunities to kind of, um, I don't know, I guess, yeah, bring people together in different ways.
Yeah.
One of the ways that I did that was, I created that gamer night.
Mm-hmm.
That was very successful for years.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about the gamer night.
What it was, so I was working at a HIV prevention organization, and we would put together like social activities. There was a program that allowed us to do that, and I got the idea that, I know a lot of gamers, and I know a lot of like LGBTQ gamers, that um, the community in general it typically revolved around, like going to bars, being on the strip. That it was mostly bars and clubs and things like that. And I thought, I know a lot of people who are queer people who want to find other queer people with similar interests, but the bar scene is very sex charged. Not everyone's, that can be intimidating. It excludes a lot of people. Um, and I thought, let me do the gamer night. I know there's a lot of people that are into games. And the minute I made it, the minute I started kind of like marketing it and pushing it out there, like it just gained so much traction, because I was right. There was a lot of people that were really
Yeah.
interested.
Need for it.
Yeah, and we would get in that small space, we get like often like 30, 40, 50 plus, sometimes 60 like people in that room. I would bring a bunch of games, all types of games. People would start bringing their games, their TVs, board games, like
Dang.
everything, all types of
Yeah.
stuff. People would start bringing like, we would get like, food and snacks. People would bring them, be like, "Oh, thanks so much for doing." And the gratitude that people expressed was really lovely, because people were saying, "Oh, wow, I didn't. There was no place like this." And I would get a very diverse group of people. It wasn't just like, a bunch of gay guys. It was we would get women, non-binary people. We'd get asexual people who typically don't feel super comfortable or super welcome in, you know, sex charged
Yeah.
environments, which, a lot of the places that, LGBT people have, that they could go to, are very, sex charged. It's all
Mm.
about, drinking. It's that whole culture, which is, I don't think it's bad. I think that's fine. But there aren't enough places that are as welcoming or cater that much to that. And I think that's why it was very successful, because a lot of people
Yeah.
felt, oh, I could be here. I don't really have to worry about like all this other stuff, or I don't really want to drink. Or, sometimes people are sober and they really don't want to be in a bar.
Yeah.
Um, but it was very successful, and it pretty much went up until right before the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
started. Um, and I think, you know, a lot of people made, what I observed, a lot of people making connections there, and not just like, you know, cruising or whatever. I'm talking about like friend groups, people meeting each other, making friends, and then after the game night, they'd be, hey, let's go out on because
Mm-hmm.
we would, it would be held right on, you know, the main drive where there was like you know, the LGBTQ community. It was like all the LGBTQ bars and clubs and businesses were right there on that strip. And so a lot of times people would go out after, and for some people it might have been more of an introduction, and they started to feel more comfortable being in the area and doing different things. And but yeah, I definitely saw people like coming together and making friends and meeting each other, and but it was just a different type of environment, a different type of
Mm-hmm.
atmosphere for them to do it.
Sure.
And also learn about, you know, health stuff, because we were doing, at the same time we were doing testing, we were doing counseling, all types of stuff. So we also used it as an opportunity to kind of like, you know, educate people on like health and how to take care of themselves and things like that. It was a really great, I thought it was a really great group. I mean, I guess not exactly like found family, but I feel like in a way it was, because
Yeah.
people really, I just really sensed like how grateful people were, and how like they were so happy that, oh my God, there's a space where we could be, and I feel good, and I feel like I belong here, and I feel, you know, people just were really just amazed by it, and um, I I would like to repeat that.
Yeah.
It would be really nice.
If it's if it's a space that people don't normally have and it's separate from their kind of like built-in family, then and they find comfort and connection, and yeah, that definitely qualifies. It's so this is actually it's too big for this little section here, but there's a bigger discussion to be had too about like what's happened to those kind of third spaces, um, why those have kind of disappeared and dropped off. Because I this is something I actually study as part of my academic career, is that community aspect and why it's been slowly eroded. There, I the first time I was exposed to that concept of like those third spaces, like your gamer night, being kind of slowly disappearing was 1990 something article called "Bowling Alone,"
Mm.
where in our communities we used to have, you know, bowling leagues, or we'd have uh, chess groups, or we'd have photography groups, or even just like bird watching groups. And those things still definitely exist to some extent, but nowhere near as the like it used to permeate American culture to have those kind of community things. You know, your neighborhood barbecue Saturdays were for all of your neighbors would come to your one. You know, you designate one person's house and they'd come and have a barbecue. And now we're at the point where it's very common to be like, you don't even know the name of your neighbors next door.
Yeah.
If something ever happened, then you have no connection with them. So like your gamer night is a good sort of like pushing back on those lack of third spaces where you carved out the niche, you created the space for that to happen, and then obviously it filled a need that was very much needed. The community that can be had around creation as a third space.
I like that. And I'm no, because now I'm just thinking like, do we have anything like that? And I'm like, well, like I said, the drive here kind of functions like that.
Yeah, I feel like that's what we're trying to create, like a digital version of that almost.
Okay, so yeah, we've basically talked about. I think we've really excavated as much as the topic of like fan family, especially in media, in art. Um, we've talked about like what it is. We've talked about different examples in media, and we kind of went on a couple little tangents on, you know, how community forms around media, and kind of in this same relationship as found family, and then even our personal experiences with it. Is there anything else that you kind of like want to say that maybe kind of adds on to just wrap up the idea, our topic today.
The thesis I kind of came back to towards the end there was a great way to create community that found connection is through art and expression, and rather than just like the straight consumption of it. So if that all appeals to you, then feel free to join us, and we'll keep seeing what happens.
Definitely, and I concur. I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully, that this project, what kind of community comes out of this project. I'm really excited
Yeah.
to build that up.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking this journey with us. How are you creatively expressing yourself this week? We're gathering a community of creatives, so join us in our Discord or connect with us on social media. You can find all of the links below.